Picture this. It's a sweltering summer evening in 1559, and the most powerful king in Europe is about to meet his doom in the most unexpected way possible. King Henry II of France, adorned in golden armor, raises his lance for what should be a simple ceremonial joust. But across the courtyard, a man who has spent years peering into the future already knows exactly how this will end. His name is Michel de Nostredame, though history would remember him by another name entirely, Nostradamus. What makes this moment so chilling is that 4 years earlier, this French physician turned prophet had written something that would send shivers down your spine. He described how the young lion would overcome the older one, piercing his eyes through a golden cage, causing 2 wounds that would bring about a cruel death. When Henry's opponent's lance splintered and drove through the king's golden visor, piercing his eye and brain, those words suddenly became terrifyingly real. But here's where things get interesting. That prediction wasn't published until 55 years after Henry died. So was Nostradamus really a prophet, or is something far more complex happening here? By the end of this video, you're going to discover the shocking truth about the most famous fortune teller in human history. And trust me, it's going to completely change how you see prophecy, prediction, and the power of belief itself. My name is telling you this story because for over 4 centuries, millions of people have turned to Nostradamus during their darkest moments, searching for answers about war, plague, natural disasters, and the fate of nations. From Napoleon to Hitler, from the assassination of Kennedy to the attacks of September 11th, his name surfaces whenever humanity faces uncertainty. But what if everything you think you know about Nostradamus is wrong? The man who would become the world's most famous prophet began life in December, 1503 inches, the sun-drenched hills of Provence, France. But Michel de Nostredame wasn't born into a world of mysticism and magic. Instead, he entered a society torn apart by religious hatred, where being different could literally get you killed. His family carried a dangerous secret that would shape everything about his future methods and the cryptic way he would communicate with the world. The Nostradame family had converted from Judaism to Christianity just 50 years before Michel's birth, changing their name from Gassonet to avoid the brutal persecution of the Inquisition. In Renaissance France, former Jews lived under constant surveillance, always one accusation away from torture or death. This atmosphere of fear and suspicion would later explain why Nostradamus wrote his predictions in such deliberately confusing language, mixing French with Latin, Italian, and Greek, wrapping his meanings in layers of symbolism that could protect him from charges of sorcery or heresy. Young Michel's early life was surprisingly ordinary. He married in his 20s, opened an apothecary shop, and seemed destined for a quiet life as a small-town pharmacist. His store was like a Renaissance-era drugstore, selling herbal medicines, sweets, and even taking bets on the gender of unborn children. But fate had other plans. Tragedy struck when plague swept through France in the 1530 seconds. The disease that would make Nostradamus famous as a healer first destroyed everything he held dear. His wife and 2 children died of the plague, while he was away on a medical mission to Italy. The man who had dedicated his life to healing couldn't save the people who mattered most to him. This devastating loss would transform him from a conventional physician into something far more extraordinary. What happened next reveals the first glimpse of the genius that would make Nostradamus legendary. Instead of retreating into grief, he threw himself into battling the plague with revolutionary methods that were centuries ahead of their time. While other doctors relied on bloodletting, mercury potions, and dressing patients in garlic-soaked robes, Nostradamus developed what we now recognize as modern medical practices. He refused to bleed his patients, instead focusing on hygiene and sanitation. He insisted on removing infected corpses from city streets and created his famous rose pill, an herbal remedy made from rose hips that was rich in vitamin C. His success rate was so remarkable that he gained fame across France and Italy as the physician who could actually cure plague victims when others failed miserably. But here's what's fascinating about this period of his life. Nostradamus was developing the same systematic, observational approach to medicine that he would later apply to prophecy. He was learning to recognize patterns, to see connections that others missed, and to think in ways that seemed almost supernatural to his contemporaries. The skills that made him a brilliant doctor would soon make him the most feared and respected prophet in Europe. After years of wandering through plague-ravaged cities, saving lives and building his reputation, Nostradamus settled in the town of Salon in 1554. He married his second wife, Anne Ponsard Gemel, and they would have 6 children together. It was here, in this quiet provincial town, that he would begin the work that would make his name immortal. At the age of 52, something profound shifted in Nostradamus. Perhaps it was the accumulated weight of all the suffering he had witnessed, or maybe it was the mystical experiences he claimed to have during his long nights of meditation and study. Whatever the catalyst, he began having visions of the future that were so vivid and disturbing that he felt compelled to record them. The method he developed was as brilliant as it was protective. Instead of making direct predictions that could be used against him by religious authorities, he created a system of coded prophecies, written in 4-line verses called quatrains. These weren't random mystical utterances. They were carefully constructed puzzles that drew from his extensive knowledge of history, astronomy, and ancient texts. Modern research has revealed something remarkable about Nostradamus's methods. He appears to have used a technique called bibliomancy, randomly opening books of prophecy and history to find inspiration for his own predictions. He borrowed heavily from ancient sources like the Mirabilis Liber of 1522, which contained prophecies from various medieval seers. But here's the crucial point. Nostradamus wasn't just copying these old predictions. He was translating them into French, updating them with astrological calculations, and projecting them into the future in ways that seemed entirely original to his readers. In 1555, he published the first edition of Les Prophéties, containing his famous centuries. Each century was meant to contain 100 quatrains, though some were incomplete. The impact was immediate and explosive. These weren't typical fortune-telling verses. They were dense, symbolic, and seemed to describe specific future events with startling detail. The prophecies covered everything from the rise and fall of empires to natural disasters, from the deaths of kings to the emergence of great leaders. What made them so compelling was their specificity combined with their ambiguity. They were detailed enough to seem authentic, but vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways. Take one of his most famous quatrains, which many believe predicted the French Revolution 2 centuries before it happened. He wrote about the death of a king, the rise of common people, and blood flowing through the streets of Paris. When Louis XVI was executed in 1793, people remembered these words, and Nostradamus's reputation as a true prophet was cemented in the popular imagination. But was he really seeing the future, or was something else happening? The answer to that question reveals a truth about human nature that's both fascinating and slightly unsettling. The secret to understanding Nostradamus lies not in what he predicted, but in how he constructed his predictions to regardless work of what actually happened. This is where the story becomes truly mind-bending, because Nostradamus had discovered something that modern psychologists wouldn't formally recognize for another 400 years. What he created was the perfect prediction machine, not because it could see the future, but because it could adapt to any future that actually occurred. Every quatrain was written with multiple layers of meaning, using words that could be interpreted in dozens of different ways. When major events happened, people would scour his writings until they found something that seemed to fit, and then declare him a prophet. But the psychological mechanism behind this goes much deeper than simple wishful thinking. When people feel powerless and out of control, their brains become desperate to find patterns and meaning, even when none exist. Nostradamus understood this human weakness and exploited it masterfully. Consider his supposed prediction of Adolf Hitler's rise to power. One of his quatrains mentions a great war near the river Hister, involving Germany, and describing a leader who would drag nations into conflict. After World War II, people pointed to this as proof of Nostradamus's supernatural abilities. But here's the problem that changes everything about this interpretation. Hister isn't a mispronounced version of Hitler at all. It's simply another name for the lower Danube River, a geographical term that Nostradamus used in several of his writings. The Nazis themselves knew this, but they still used the prophecy as propaganda. dropping pamphlets over France claiming that Nostradamus had predicted their victory. Even when the interpretation was wrong, the power of belief made it politically useful. This reveals something crucial about how Nostradamus's prophecies actually work in the real world. They become true not because they accurately describe future events, but because people believe they do, and that belief influences how those people behave. The prophecies create their own reality through the power of suggestion and social influence. The pattern repeats itself throughout history with disturbing consistency. During the English Civil War, people found quatrains that seemed to predict Parliament executing their king. During the American Civil War, both North and South claimed Nostradamus supported their cause. When Napoleon conquered Europe, French scholars discovered prophecies about a great emperor from the West who would reshape the continent. Each generation finds exactly what they're looking for in Nostradamus's writings, and what they find always seems to perfectly match the major concerns and fears of their particular time period. This isn't coincidence. It's the result of a sophisticated psychological manipulation that Nostradamus built into the very structure of his prophecies. But the most shocking example of this phenomenon occurred in our own lifetime, and it reveals just how far people will go to make Nostradamus's prophecies fit modern events. After September 11th, 2001, one particular quatrain went viral across the internet, spreading faster than any news story of that era. The verse described two steel birds falling from the sky onto a metropolis, with the sky burning at 45 degrees latitude and fire approaching a great new city. People shared this frantically, convinced that Nostradamus had predicted the terrorist attacks 4 centuries earlier. The psychological comfort of believing that such a traumatic event had been foretold was apparently worth more than checking whether the prophecy was actually real. It wasn't. The entire quatrain was completely fabricated, created by someone on the internet in the aftermath of the attacks. But millions of people believed it was authentic, shared it with their friends and families, and used it as evidence of Nostradamus's prophetic powers. Even when the hoax was exposed, many people continued to believe the fake prophecy was real, because the alternative was accepting that the universe was random and unpredictable. This fabricated prophecy reveals something profound about why Nostradamus remains so popular in the 21st century. In an age of information overload and constant uncertainty, people are more desperate than ever for someone who can make sense of chaos and provide reassurance about the future. Nostradamus fills that role perfectly, not because he actually knew what was going to happen, but because his system is designed to work regardless of what happens. The real genius of Nostradamus wasn't supernatural insight into future events. It was his deep understanding of human psychology and his ability to create a product that would remain relevant and compelling across centuries of social, political, and technological change. He built a prediction system that could survive any historical development because it was flexible enough to accommodate any interpretation. Modern scholars who have studied the original texts reveal even more disturbing truths about how Nostradamus's reputation was constructed. Most English translations of his work are deliberately distorted to make them seem more accurate than they actually are. Translators routinely change words, alter meanings, and insert modern concepts that didn't exist in 16th century French. Even more shocking, many of the prophecies attributed to Nostradamus weren't published until decades or even centuries after the events they supposedly predicted. The famous quatrain about King Henry's death, for example, didn't appear in print until 55 years after the king died. This means that what people think are supernatural predictions are actually historical accounts written after the fact, and then backdated to make Nostradamus seem prophetic. The publication history of his prophecies shows a clear pattern of continuous editing and revision, with new quatrains being added and old ones being modified to better fit historical events as they occurred. This wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate strategy to maintain Nostradamus's reputation across changing circumstances and evolving political situations. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of the Nostradamus phenomenon is what happens when you actually test his predictions scientifically. No quatrain has ever been successfully interpreted to predict a specific event before that event occurred. Every single example of his supposed prophetic accuracy is what researchers call a postdiction, where vague statements are retrofitted to historical events after they happen. When you examine his few specific, dated predictions, the results are even more damning. He predicted that the world would end in 1999, that a great king would emerge from the East in 1700, and that Europe would be destroyed by war in 1792. None of these predictions came true, but somehow his reputation as an accurate prophet survived these spectacular failures. This selective memory is crucial to understanding how the Nostradamus myth perpetuates itself. People remember the hits and forget the misses, creating an illusion of accuracy that doesn't match the actual historical record. It's the same psychological bias that makes people believe in lucky numbers, astrology, and other forms of magical thinking. The story of Nostradamus ultimately isn't about prophecy at all. It's about the human need to believe that someone, somewhere, understands what's happening in the world and can provide guidance about what's coming next. In times of crisis and uncertainty, that need becomes so powerful that people will accept almost any source of comfort, even if that source is demonstrably unreliable. What makes this psychological manipulation even more sophisticated is how Nostradamus embedded multiple escape routes into every single prophecy. If one interpretation didn't work, there were always backup meanings waiting to be discovered. He wrote about lions that could represent kings or countries, eagles that might symbolize empires or individual leaders, and numbers that could refer to years, ages, or quantities. This linguistic flexibility meant that his prophecies could never truly fail, because failure was impossible when success could be redefined at will. The mathematical probability of this system working becomes clear when you consider that Nostradamus wrote nearly 1,000 quatrains covering every conceivable type of human disaster and triumph. Wars, plagues, natural disasters, political upheavals, religious conflicts, technological changes, and social revolutions are all represented in his work. With such comprehensive coverage of human experience, something was bound to seem prophetic, no matter what actually happened in the centuries that followed. But the deeper you dig into his methods, the more you realize that Nostradamus was operating on a level of strategic thinking that was centuries ahead of his time. He wasn't just protecting himself from religious persecution or creating a sustainable business model for prophecy. He was constructing what we would now recognize as a viral information system, designed to spread and adapt across cultures and generations. The key insight that modern researchers have uncovered is that Nostradamus deliberately wrote his prophecies to be retranslated and reinterpreted by each new generation. He knew that languages change, that political systems evolve, and that what seems important in one era becomes irrelevant in the next. So he created a flexible framework that could accommodate any social or technological transformation. Consider how his prophecies have adapted to different historical periods. In the 17th century, readers found predictions about religious wars and royal succession. In the 18th century, the same texts revealed insights about democratic revolutions and the rights of common people. The 19th century discovered prophecies about industrial progress and nationalism. The 20th century uncovered warnings about world wars and technological disasters. Each era found exactly what they needed to find, and what they found always seemed to address their specific concerns and fears. This isn't magical prescience. It's sophisticated psychological engineering that exploits how human pattern recognition works under conditions of stress and uncertainty. The really disturbing part is how this system has evolved in the digital age. Modern Nostradamus enthusiasts use computer programs to analyze his quatrains, searching for hidden numerical codes and astronomical alignments that earlier interpreters missed. They've created elaborate conspiracy theories connecting his prophecies to everything from alien visitations to stock market crashes to the emergence of artificial intelligence. Social media has supercharged this process, allowing people to share their interpretations instantly with millions of others. When major news events occur, Nostradamus-related content explodes across platforms as people desperately search for meaning and predictability in chaotic situations. The algorithm-driven nature of modern information distribution means that the most sensational and emotionally compelling interpretations spread fastest, regardless of their accuracy or logical coherence. What's particularly fascinating is how different cultures have adapted Nostradamus to fit their own historical narratives and political needs. In Russia, scholars have found prophecies about the rise of a great northern empire. In China, interpreters discovered predictions about the emergence of an Eastern power that would reshape global civilization. In the Middle East, his writings apparently foretold the conflicts and transformations of the modern era. Each culture finds validation for their own importance and destiny in the same set of ambiguous French verses written 5 centuries ago. This universal applicability isn't accidental. It's the result of Nostradamus creating a prediction system that was culturally neutral enough to be adopted by any society while being specific enough to seem personally relevant to individual readers. The business model behind modern Nostradamus interpretation reveals another layer of this ongoing deception. Publishers have discovered that books about his prophecies sell particularly well during times of crisis and uncertainty. After September 11th, during the 2008 financial crisis, and throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, Nostradamus-related publications experienced massive sales spikes as people searched for reassurance about the future. This creates a powerful incentive for authors and publishers to continually discover new interpretations and previously overlooked prophecies. The market demands fresh content, so scholars and enthusiasts obligingly find new meanings in old texts. The economic engine of prophecy publishing ensures that Nostradamus will remain perpetually relevant and constantly updated for contemporary concerns. Television documentaries and online videos about Nostradamus follow the same pattern, timing their release to coincide with major global events or significant anniversaries. The production companies know that fear and uncertainty drive viewership, so they craft narratives that emphasize the most dramatic and frightening possible interpretations of his prophecies. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. Some of the most influential political figures in history have used Nostradamus' prophecies to justify their actions and rally public support for their causes. Napoleon reportedly carried a copy of the prophecies with him during his campaigns, claiming that they predicted his rise to power and his eventual conquest of Europe. Hitler and the Nazi Party explicitly used Nostradamus' prophecies as propaganda tools, distributing carefully selected and deliberately mistranslated quatrains to convince people that their victory was inevitable and divinely ordained. They understood that people who believe the future is predetermined are more likely to accept authoritarian control and less likely to resist oppressive policies. This political weaponization of prophecy reveals something crucial about how power operates in human societies. Leaders who can convince people that they represent inevitable historical forces gain enormous psychological advantages over their opponents. If the future is already written and you're on the winning side according to ancient prophecy, then resistance seems futile and collaboration appears wise. The same dynamic plays out in modern politics, where politicians and their supporters routinely claim that various Nostradamus prophecies support their candidates and predict their victories. Social media makes it easier than ever to spread these interpretations to targeted audiences who are already predisposed to believe them. What makes this phenomenon particularly insidious is how it undermines democratic decision-making. When people believe that political outcomes are predetermined by supernatural forces, they become less likely to participate actively in shaping their own future. The prophecy becomes a self-fulfilling mechanism that reduces human agency and critical thinking. The psychological research on this topic reveals why Nostradamus' prophecies remain so compelling despite their demonstrated inaccuracy. When people feel overwhelmed by complexity and uncertainty, their brains automatically search for simple explanations and clear patterns. The more chaotic the world seems, the more attractive become any system that promises to make sense of that chaos. Nostradamus' prophecies provide exactly this kind of psychological relief. They suggest that apparently random events are actually part of a larger, predetermined plan. Natural disasters, terrorist attacks, economic collapses, and political upheavals all become more bearable when people believe they were foretold centuries ago by a wise and mystical prophet. This comfort comes at a significant cost. Belief in predetermined futures can lead to passive acceptance of preventable suffering and reduced to solve problems, that motivation require collective action. If climate change was prophesied by Nostradamus, then perhaps it's inevitable, and we shouldn't waste energy trying to prevent it. If economic inequality was foretold in the 16th century, then maybe it's a natural and unchangeable aspect of human society. The opportunity cost of this magical thinking extends beyond individual psychology to affect entire civilizations. Resources that could be invested in education, scientific research, and social problem solving are instead directed toward interpreting ancient prophecies and preparing for predetermined disasters. Human creativity and intelligence are channeled into elaborate intellectual exercises that produce no practical benefits for anyone except the people selling prophecy-related products and services. Perhaps most troubling is how the Nostradamus phenomenon reveals the fragility of rational thinking in human societies. Even in an age of unprecedented scientific knowledge and technological capability, millions of people still prefer mystical explanations to evidence-based analysis. The same cognitive biases that made his prophecies popular in the 16th century continue to operate with full force in the 21st century. The internet has amplified rather than corrected these tendencies. Instead of providing access to better information, digital technology has made it easier for people to find confirmation for whatever they already want to believe. Nostradamus enthusiasts can now connect with like-minded individuals around the world, creating echo chambers that reinforce and intensify their convictions while filtering out contradictory evidence. Algorithm-driven content recommendation systems have made this problem worse by showing people more of what they've already engaged with. Someone who watches one video about Nostradamus prophecies will be recommended dozens more, creating a feedback loop that can quickly transform casual interest into obsessive belief. The business model of digital platforms actively rewards content that generates strong emotional reactions, which means sensational and frightening interpretations of prophecies get promoted over balanced and skeptical analysis. This technological amplification of ancient superstitions creates new challenges for education and public policy. How do you teach critical thinking skills to people who are constantly exposed to information designed to bypass rational analysis? How do you promote scientific literacy in a media environment that rewards magical thinking? How do you encourage civic participation among people who believe the future is already determined by supernatural forces? The answers to these questions will determine whether human civilization can successfully navigate the complex challenges of the 21st century. Climate change, technological disruption, political polarization, and global inequality all require evidence-based solutions and collective action. These problems cannot be solved by consulting ancient prophecies or waiting for predetermined outcomes to unfold. Yet the enduring appeal of Nostradamus suggests that many people would rather retreat into comforting illusions than confront difficult realities. The psychological mechanisms that made his prophecies popular 5 centuries ago show no signs of weakening. If anything, the pace of social change and the complexity of modern problems have made people even more desperate for simple answers and reassuring predictions. This creates a fundamental tension between what people want to believe and what they need to understand. The future isn't written in cryptic verses or hidden in ancient texts. It's being created every day by billions of individual decisions and collective choices. Understanding this reality is essential for anyone who wants to shape their own destiny rather than being shaped by the fantasies and fears of others. The mystery of Nostradamus ultimately isn't about prophecy or supernatural insight. It's about the power of belief to create its own reality and the human tendency to prefer comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. In a world where information is abundant but wisdom remains scarce, these lessons have never been more relevant or more urgent to understand. The story doesn't end with understanding how these psychological mechanisms work. It gets far stranger when you realize that Nostradamus himself might not have believed in his own prophetic abilities. Evidence from his personal correspondence reveals a man who was deeply skeptical about supernatural claims and who understood exactly what he was creating. In letters to friends and colleagues, Nostradamus described his prophecies as intellectual exercises rather than divine revelations. He wrote about studying historical patterns and projecting them forward using mathematical calculations and astrological observations. This wasn't mystical channeling of supernatural forces. It was systematic analysis disguised as prophecy to protect him from accusations of practicing forbidden arts. The most revealing aspect of his private writings is how he discussed the commercial success of his predictions. Nostradamus was acutely aware that his prophecies were profitable precisely because they were ambiguous. He understood that clear, specific predictions would quickly prove false and destroy his reputation, while vague symbolic language could be interpreted indefinitely to maintain his credibility across generations. This calculated ambiguity extended to every aspect of his prophetic method. He deliberately mixed different languages to create multiple possible meanings for each phrase. He used astronomical terms that could refer to actual celestial events or serve as metaphors for political developments. He embedded numerical codes that could be decoded in dozens of different ways depending on which mathematical system interpreters chose to apply. Modern computer analysis of his complete works reveals patterns that confirm this strategic approach. The most successful prophecies share specific linguistic characteristics that maximize interpretive flexibility while maintaining an illusion of precision. Words are chosen for their multiple meanings. Sentence structures are designed to support contradictory readings, and symbolic references draw from universal human experiences that remain constant across cultures and centuries. What makes this even more sophisticated is how Nostradamus created built-in mechanisms for his prophecies to evolve over time. He included references to technological concepts that didn't exist in his era, but could be reinterpreted by future generations. Terms like fire from the sky could mean lightning to medieval readers, artillery to Renaissance audiences, aircraft to 20th century interpreters, and nuclear weapons to modern analysts. This linguistic time travel effect wasn't accidental. Nostradamus deliberately chose words and phrases that would acquire new meanings as human knowledge expanded. He understood that languages evolve and that concepts considered impossible in one era become commonplace in the next. By writing prophecies that could grow more relevant over time, he ensured their perpetual commercial viability. The business strategy behind this approach becomes clear when you examine the publication history of his works. Initial editions were modest AIM affairs at local markets, but as his reputation grew, publishers began producing increasingly elaborate versions with extensive commentaries and interpretations. Each new edition added layers to expand of meaning and the possible applications of his original verses. This publishing evolution reveals another crucial insight about how the Nostradamus phenomenon operates. The prophecies themselves are just raw material. The real power lies in the interpretation industry that has grown around them. Scholars, translators, commentators, and enthusiasts have created a vast intellectual ecosystem that generates endless new meanings from the same source material. Every major historical event triggers a new wave of Nostradamus interpretation as experts compete to discover previously overlooked connections between his quatrains and current developments. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle where the prophecies remain perpetually relevant because someone is always finding new ways to make them seem prophetic. The economic incentives driving this process are enormous. Publishers know that Nostradamus-related content sells consistently well, especially during times of crisis and uncertainty. Authors can build entire careers around discovering new interpretations and previously hidden meanings in his works. Television producers and documentary makers have created an entire subgenre of programming dedicated to exploring his predictions and their alleged fulfillment. This commercial apparatus has fundamentally altered how people interact with his prophecies. Instead of reading them as historical curiosities from the 16th century, modern audiences encounter them through layers of contemporary interpretation and analysis. The original texts become secondary to the elaborate theoretical frameworks that interpreters have constructed around them. What's particularly fascinating is how this interpretive industry has developed its own internal logic and methodology. Professional Nostradamus analysts have created sophisticated systems for decoding his prophecies, complete with specialized terminology, standardized procedures, and peer review processes that mimic legitimate academic disciplines. So there you have it. The mystery of Nostradamus isn't really about prophecy at all. It's about the extraordinary power of human psychology and our desperate need to find meaning in chaos. This 16th century physician didn't predict the future, but he did something far more remarkable. He created a system so psychologically sophisticated that it's still manipulating minds 5 centuries later. The next time you see a Nostradamus prediction trending on social media, remember that you're not witnessing supernatural insight. You're watching one of history's most successful psychological experiments, still running at full capacity. The future remains unwritten, and that's exactly how it should be.